Hello and welcome to Inside Politics. I'm Anastasiya Lavrina. The latest news around Iran-US tensions is once again raising concerns far beyond the Middle East. Washington has reinforced its military presence in the Gulf with additional warships and aircraft, while Tehran warns that any attack could trigger consequences for the entire region. Naval drills, sharper rhetoric, and growing uncertainty are fueling fears that even a limited confrontation could quickly escalate and spread. This is no longer just a bilateral standoff. Energy routes through the Strait of Hormuz, global markets, and regional security balances are already under pressure. And for countries, including the South Caucasus, the potential spillover effects could directly impact trade corridors, energy flows, and overall stability. At the same time, regional players such as Azerbaijan and Turkey are pushing for diplomacy over escalation, working to ensure their region does not become another arena for great power confrontation. Now we will examine what this rising tension really means and whether diplomacy can still prevent a wider crisis. Joining me now is Turkan Bozkurt, human rights activist and deputy director of IPEC Research Center. Turkan, welcome to Inside Politics.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for joining us. So, Iranian officials say progress is expected on the framework to restart nuclear negotiations with the United States. How realistic is a restart of nuclear talks in the current climate of military pressure and sanctions? And what's your assessments of the situation?
That's correct. I believe we're at a point where both sides want to resolve this issue on the table rather than escalate this militarily so that it is beyond control and brings other regional and international actors into play more than it already has and potentially lead to defragmentation of the country. So I believe both Iranian government as well as United States want to resolve this diplomatically as soon as possible. A restart, I believe, is definitely realistic, and this is in the narrow sense of opening a channel because both sides are signaling interest in avoiding a slide towards wider confrontation. We've also seen reporting that indicates through the use of diplomatic channels in Turkey, potentially involving the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi and United States Steve Witkoff, who, by the way, is expected to be in Israel tomorrow. So in this context, with the military pressure that we've been seeing in the past few days, it does seem that both sides are moving towards diplomacy, and what is, I think, far less realistic in the current climate is that there will be a comprehensive deal. I think it will take many negotiations and many talks before we reach a conclusion, before we reach a resolution, because U.S. demands we've seen that go beyond the nuclear files. They're asking for the end of missiles, regional proxies, and other investments that the Iranian government has been working on for a long time. So I do believe that the diplomatic channels are open and working, but it will take time before we see any sort of resolution on the table.
Absolutely. It will definitely take time. And Iran and the United States were previously engaged in indirect talks last year, but negotiations collapsed after Israel's strike and the 12-day conflict that followed. Given how quickly the last round of talks fell apart, what guarantees exist that this process won't collapse again at the first crisis?
Yeah, I honestly don't think that there are any guarantees at this point, especially when we think about how the aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln and accompanying many warships have been heading towards the Gulf and the region. I think this itself is an indication that there are no guarantees at all that this will not end in a military escalation. And I think this move by United States shows that they want to be prepared. They want to be ready in case the diplomatic channels don't reach a solution. The Tomahawk cruise missiles and other naval assets are there to ensure that Iran is backed in a corner, and that the regional networks, the U.S. retains the ability to deliver precision strikes on broader force if it wanted to. I think this is very different than the 12-day conflict. The 12-day conflict initially began as a conflict between Israel and Iran, and it was a way to weaken its axis of resistance and then portray a direct attack towards Iran. United States involvement there was mainly on the nuclear facilities. The attack with the B-2 Spirit bomber that targeted nuclear facilities, very different than attacking Tehran directly and starting a regional war, as we've seen the Iranian government warn against this many times. So I don't think there are any guarantees that this process won't collapse on its face.
Absolutely. And as you rightly mentioned, Washington has reinforced its military presence in the Gulf with additional warships and aircraft. Iran's leadership has publicly warned that any U.S. strike could trigger broader conflict across the region. How likely do you think it is, and which neighboring regions are most vulnerable to spillover first?
Any attack against Iran will no doubt be a collaboration between the United States and Israel. And while the United States may be geographically too far for Iran to attack or target, Israel certainly isn't. And we saw Iran's missiles attack, and some of them even breached the Iron Dome during the 12-day conflict. And it is something that we've seen the Iranian regime preparing, especially with their Fatah missiles. We've also seen Iran's proxies have begun to openly threaten to join their patron for any retaliation. In Lebanon, we've seen Naim Qasem, who's the leader of Hezbollah currently, broadcast televised speech to hundreds of protesters that they're ready to stand behind the Iranian flag and Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. He said when Trump threatens Imam Khamenei, he's threatening tens of millions who follow this leader. So he's also bringing in this element of religion into it, so that maybe not only the Shiites in Lebanon, but also in other Islamic countries may join in order to support Iran. We've also seen Iran-backed Shiite militias in neighboring countries, specifically Iraq, who's been preparing and saying statements that they're going to be joining Iran. They're even calling themselves in this martyrdom operation, which shows that they're deeply involved in the case. But in my opinion, I think these two branches are the weakest of the axis of resistance, and I think the Houthis in Yemen would actually play a bigger impact by attacking, ships and launching missiles against Israel and U.S. bases. We've also seen countries like Turkey, UAE, and Azerbaijan, and as well as some other GCC countries come forward to try and mediate this. So any escalation between Iran and United States and Israel will definitely not only be between the three of them, as we've seen many other regional actors and international actors come forward.
Apart from the potential spillover to the neighborhood countries in the region, there is also some concern about the energy markets and at the same time how the escalation may affect the prices of oil on the global market. So naval drills and military exercises have been announced near strategic choke points such as the Strait of Hormuz. In a worst-case scenario, how fragile are these choke points and how quickly could disruption ripple through global energy markets?
Yeah, the ripple is very quick, and we've already started seeing some of this. In a worst case scenario, strategic checkpoints like the Strait of Hormuz are actually very difficult to close militarily. But this is a market that's based on news rather than actual evidence-based actions. They carry outsized volumes, they have limited redundancy, and they sit inside an escalatory environment. So the U.S. Energy Information Administration estimates that in 2024, roughly 20 million barrels per day transits through the Strait of Hormuz. This is a large number. It's about 1/5 of global petroleum liquids consumption. And there are no really other alternative options if traffic were to be blocked. There is no bypass infrastructure that exists. So this means that any bulk of flow that goes through that strait, regardless of if it belongs to Iran or not, would be impacted by this escalation if there were to be any. We would also see a really big surge on prices because prices are based on expectations long before any barrels physically actually stop flowing. And this isn't an issue that only impacts Iran. It's an issue that impacts any sort of power that moves through that strait and works on business. So there's also a big challenge here that comes to the countries in Asia that Iran deals with, as well as the GCC countries.
So let's also talk more about the situation in the region, at least the countries, how they do react on the possible escalation in between of Tehran and Washington. Regional powers, you previously stated that, such as Azerbaijan and Turkey, have publicly called for restraint and diplomacy, while Baku has clearly stated that its territory and airspace will not be used in any confrontation with Iran. Both countries are maintaining active political dialogue with multiple sides. Then how exactly can Baku and Ankara help reduce tensions in practical terms beyond statements? And can they realistically act as mediators, offer diplomatic channels, or create platforms for dialogue between the sides?
Yes, I think actually the Republic of Azerbaijan and Turkey are probably the biggest mediators on the table. I understand that there are Gulf countries who are involved, but I think the bulk of the responsibility here is on these two countries, especially when we think about the election of President Masoud Pezeshkian as the president was for exact this reason, with a weakening of the axis of resistance and an attack on Iran showed Iran that they needed better relations with Turkey and the Republic of Azerbaijan. The Republic of Azerbaijan has also been both economically and geopolitically growing and becoming more valuable both to the region but also to the West with their good relations with Israel and the recent betterment of their relationships with the United States. We know that the President Ilham Aliyev has given messages that the Azerbaijani airspace or territory will not be used towards an attack on Iran. We've also seen recent interview of Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan with Foreign Minister Abbas Arakci, showing that these talks are already happening and Baku and Ankara are playing a really important role in reducing the conflict. For Baku and their contribution that their territory and airspace will not be used shows that they're also hoping for a de-escalation. Turkey has already been talking about becoming a sort of a mediator between Iran and the Western countries. So beyond just the diplomatic channels, we're also seeing a public request from both countries to destabilize and their willingness to facilitate and host mediation.
Well, Turkan, you already explained the situation in the Horn of Hormuz and how it can affect the oil market, but also the trade corridors. Like the middle corridor are becoming more strategically important aimed global instability. So do you think the instability around the Gulf increase the importance of the South Caucasus as an alternative route, or does it risk destabilizing these corridors as well?
Yes, I definitely think that the middle corridor is gaining more attraction and more importance as the world politics continues. We've already seen this diversification logic reinforced by the post 2022 risk environment on the northern route. After Russia's full-scale war against Ukraine, which made this middle corridor transit politically safer and economically better. Instability in the Persian Gulf can increase the relative attractiveness of the South Caucasus and the middle corridor because it would push shippers and energy market to diversify away from the choke points like the Strait of Hormuz, as we talked about. This strengthens the strategic case for the Baku-Tbilisi Kars-linked Trans-Caspian route as well, the BTK-linked route as well as in a broader hedging strategy, especially for time-sensitive or urgent shipments or cargo transportation. It becomes really important. Gulf instability can spill risk into these corridors as well. We need to also keep in mind that the northwest of Iran is where Azerbaijan and Turkey border, and this is a region where a lot of Azerbaijanis in Iran live who are ethnically Turkic. So there could also be an immigration aspect to that impacts this corridor, but these are all at this point conjectures, and we need more data and information with how these diplomatic relations are going before anything concrete can be said.
And just to conclude, as we agreed, diplomatic channels remain open with multiple capitals calling for negotiations and restraint. Can diplomacy still outpace escalation, and what will be the practical next step toward de-escalation? What should happen in the upcoming hours or days to de-escalate the situation from the practical term?
Yes, this actually reminds me of the Cuban Missile era, as we remember, where a lot of, similar to the Cold War era as well, where a lot of military and missile movements we saw was all meant to bring people onto the table and, de-escalate with, stabilized first package kind of short military temperature drops. And I think in the same way, we need to focus more on what Iran can do and what Iran is not willing to do, at least. And I think the main point that the United States and Israel want, at least publicly, which is the de-escalation or the stopping of the nuclear enrichment within the country and any development towards nuclear powers to be stopped. And I think as we move forward with these conversations, we need to really focus on what is attainable and what is not. I don't think it is attainable for the Western countries to demand, for instance, Iran to stop their proxy investments. And similarly, I think Iran also needs to recognize that that there is no way that they are capable of winning a military stand down against the world's most invested and most developed military power, which is United States, helped by Israel. In this sense, the role of Baku and Ankara here to maintain those negotiations and move forward with in mind that, at the end of the day, with these conflicts, it is the people, it is the civilians both inside Iran and outside Iran, who are impacted greatly by these escalations.
Well, we will definitely continue to follow the development of the situation around the tensions between Tehran and Washington. But as for now, unfortunately, we are running out of time. That's why I'm very thankful for your joining today. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So the situation remains fragile, with military signals growing louder even as diplomatic channels stay open. What happens next between Washington and Tehran will not stay confined to one region. The consequences will be felt across security calculations worldwide. And we will definitely continue following every development. Thank you for watching Inside Politics, and I see you next time.